agenda for today is Azure Logic apps for Azure Database DBA. For your information, this session is being recorded. I am Jean-Joseph, your host for today. Our rules are you guys are free to comment, but with respect. There must be no offensive comment. And I have you guys I already turned off the access for video sharing and everything. However, at the end of the session, I will give you guys access to unmute yourself and ask any questions if you want, if you guys do have any. Also, please, you don't even have to type your questions because I disabled this, but you will have access to still ask your questions when you do have access to unmute yourself. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, Bright, Facebook, Eventbrite, YouTube, Meetup, and Twitter, right? And then, as I said, for today's presentation, we will have Ariely, Ronen. Am I saying it right? Ronen? And then
almost, but that's okay.
Perfect. He is one of the best SQL community builder out there. He is an MVP, consultant, application, and architect, right? He's gonna introduce himself and tell you more about, his IT experience. We do have a tons of other presentations are already available for you guys. Feel free to go and reserve your spot. The next one is the Cloud Awakens Azure SQL Server for the on-premises DBA, and the next one is NoSQL versus SQL. And I would suggest all of you to go and reserve your spot for both of them, especially for the DBA out there or SQL developer who doesn't know Azure, you understand, and also who doesn't know what is NoSQL. So I would suggest you guys to go and reserve your spot. And then if you guys want to submit any session, feel free to submit it at jjoseph at Big Data Driven. I think that's all I have. Ronen, you are free to take over, share your screen, introduce yourself, and start with the presentation. And by the way, Ronen, it is an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay, John, can you please confirm that you can see my camera and my screen and you can hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we can start. Good morning, good evening, and good day to all, and welcome to the Logic Apps for Azure Database Administrator session. The first question which we need to answer is what a connection between developing application and managing databases. Once we will understand this, then we will be able to discuss when, how, and why to use Logic Apps. Now, before I start, I noticed that the chat is not available. I hope that next time it will be. And it is extremely important for questions that you want to ask me or discussions between yourself. So to bypass this issue, if you have Facebook, please go to my page, not page, to my profile, and we will just use one of the thread. So use the thread that I announced the meeting. If you have question, put it here. Hopefully you have Facebook and we will try to follow it. So this will help us during the meeting. Check the URL. I cannot give you the URL in the chat because we don't have a chat. So just copy it. Basically, you go to Facebook, then go into add Ronen.Ariely with Y at the end. Okay, I hope that you wrote it. If I will ask you what kind of task do you spend most of your time on, then I would probably get tens of tasks which are done on the data level, on the database level, and on the host level, as DBA I'm talking. But most of those tasks related to interaction with external tools or external users. How do we perform those tasks, and which tool will you use for those tasks? If you are using SQL Server on-premise, so this is simpler. For example, how will you interact with the users? Send them email, create reports, trigger alerts to yourself and your team when there is an event, and so on. So using on-premises SQL Server, those tasks can be done using built-in tools in the server level or using external tools which are installed in the same machine. For example, we can send email using the built-in stored procedure SP send DB mail. We can control the host environment using XP command shell. We can use SQL CLR, Python, R. If you are using SQL Server 2019, then you can use Java. All this directly from Transact SQL query. We can also use undocumented registry extended stored procedure, and we can use a component object model. We have, of course, external tools like PowerShell that we can use to connect directly to our server. But those tasks can be very challenging when we are using a fully managed platform as a service, such as Azure Database. Azure Logic Apps is the perfect enterprise integration platform. It is a cost-effective solution. The learning curve is very fast, as you will see today. In less than 1 hour, you will be almost expert. It's based on a graphical flow and can be developed in seconds using only drag and drops directly in the Azure Portal. It is a scalable solution and yet lightweight service. It has a built-in monitoring and historical insight. And it has hundreds, more than 300 of enterprise connectors out of the box, including a SQL Server and connector to Office 365 Outlook, which those we are going to use today. This session is 100% practical demonstration, live demonstration. My goal is not to dive into Azure Logic Apps theory, but to provide a few practical solutions for common scenario. If you manage Azure databases, then this session is for you. The scenarios and the solutions which I will present are exactly what you need for daily work. If you are developers, then this session can give you a great introduction to Azure Logic Apps. Okay, at this time I can introduce myself in short. My name is Ronen Ariely. I am from Israel. I'm a senior consultant and an architect. I work in the field of developing and data platforms. I lead several technical communities, and you can find me usually using the nickname Pituach, which has no meaning but the word mefateach, developer in Hebrew. By the way, the logo on the right upper corner is the logo of the data platform Global Hebrew user group, which I lead. I plan to present this exactly same topic in Hebrew in a few weeks. And as I say, it's time for demo. Azure Logic apps and Azure Database can interact in two-way way. For our first scenario, we will trigger the execution of Logic apps as a result of events in the database. So the first scenario is each time that a row inserted to a table, we want to send an email. Let's go to my machine. I prepare in advance a simple table, which include the information of first name, last name, email. And we will check how we can get an email each time we have insert. So let's go to our portal. You can notice that we have Logic Apps, we have Logic App Preview. Those are different services. If we will have time, I will speak about the differences. We are using the Logic Apps. And we start from 0, add. Again, we can create a preview or we can use the consumption, which is what we are going to use. Let me create a new resource group. The first Logic app will be DML, since it related to DML action. Insert. Everything stay the same. Next. Create. It should be very fast and it will be created in seconds. Okay, we are ready to go. When we create the Logic apps at first, it came empty and it gives us several ideas where we can start. You can notice that we must start with a trigger. A Logic app always starts with a trigger, something that executes the Logic app. And basically what happened, each time it triggered, then the Logic app create a new instance, and then it start to work over all the workflow. I like to start with a blank Logic app, and we will go from here. You can already see those two controls, since those are the last one that I used. But if you don't see them, we will start with searching SQL Server, since we want to use a connection to SQL Server. And you can notice that we have only two options here for triggers. The first one is when item is created. This is for insert. Every time that a row inserted to the table, this trigger will be executed. And the second type is for update, when a row is updated. So this is what Microsoft covered for us. It's important for the next scenario. So this is the one that I want to use. And since this is the first time that I'm using this Logic apps, I will need to create a connector to the SQL Server. Let's give it a name. I will use SQL Server authentication, and I simply need to connect to my Azure database using the same way that we connect any application, including SSMS. So this is the server that I'm going to use. And this will be the database. Those are the ones that we saw here. So this is the database that I'm going to use. Don't forget to secure your environment and allow only specific IPs to use your server. Okay, create. Do you think that this will work? Oops, we have a problem. I mentioned IP. If you will go over this message, you will see that the problem is that the Azure Logic app could not connect to my server. The Azure Logic app need permission. So this is a trick that I'm using. I want to get this error because this error give me the IP that the Azure Logic apps need. So let's copy this IP and go to our server. So this is our server in the Azure, and we need to configure the firewall so we can work with the Logic app. We have two options. Option one, we can just give all the Azure services an option to use this server. I don't like it because I want to secure my server a bit more. Now, if I need to use Logic app that I don't know what is the IP and it might change, so this is a good, or this is the solution that I will choose as a fit solution. But if I need to execute Logic app in a short period of time and I can use this trick to find exactly what is the IP, then I can use this IP and only let this IP permission to get get into my server. Let's save it. Okay. Going back here, and if everything okay, let's try again. Everything okay. And now we can connect from the Azure Logic app to our server. Let's start. We want to use the connection that I have just created. So this is the connection. You see the name condml. Let's use the server from the connection database and the table name. Those are the tables that I have at this time, and I'm talking about this table. Now, in production, you would probably want to give this value like execute every 1 hour or even more, because you don't want pressure on your server. We need to remember that Azure Logic apps do not work with a push approach. It means that the Azure Logic app needs to connect the server every X time. For the sake of the lecture, since I want to show you the result of everything that I execute, I will use very short period of time, 10 seconds. This means that every 10 seconds, this application will try to connect our server to see if something was changed. Okay, let's save it. Great. Now we can start to add steps. Azure Logic Apps is a flow GUI system. So the way that it works, it has one step, and the result of this step will go to the next step. We can add a new step, and this time I want to add a send email. This was our goal. So I will use Office 365. There are a lot of other controls that we can use. We can use even Google or other email system, but for today I will use Office 365 Outlook. And what I want to do, the control that I want to do, or the task that I want to do, is send email. This is the one that I want to use. Send email version 2. We already created the connector to the SQL server in this step. Now we need to make a connector to our account. So let's sign in. And that's it. We created a connector. We will see it in a second where it is hidden. And now we can start to configure our email. So for my email, I can say, let's use this. I will send the email to this person, which is my community email. It's not something that I actually follow. And they can use a subject and say hello. And they can use a body and say, this is my Logic app. If I will save this, it will work, everything great. But for the next scenario, which I will use right away in this version, I want to use dynamic data. I don't want to use an email like this. I want to send the email to the person that added to the table. And I want to say hello and use his name. How do we do it? Check this on the right side. The Azure Logic app automatically gives us the option to use dynamic data. Let's click on See More. Where this data came from, previous step. Okay, so for the email address, I want to use email. This is the email from the query that inserted the row. And now I want to use hello, use first name, blank, last name. Wait. For the body, I want to use, again, hello, first name, and we can use some more information from my table or from the input to the table, but I will show all the information as one JSON. So this is the content of the email. Let's save it. And it took us less than 5 minutes, and we already have a working Logic app, which do exactly what we wanted. Let's test it. Hopefully it's working. It is live, always in live demo. We have this question, will it work? So let's execute, simple insert. And you can start counting 10 seconds because we know that my Logic app check the database every 10 seconds. So it should be very soon if it is working well. Voila, I don't know if you heard it, but I had a ring saying an email arrived. Remember the information that I just inserted? Let's check the table. This is the only information that we have at this time. And let's go to my email. Here is the email. Hello, Ronen 01, Ariely 01, and we have the content, hello, and all the JSON. This was the first and second scenario. Whoops. This. Second scenario that I want to use, I want to detect when table is created. How can I do it? We saw that the Logic app only gave us option to check when a row insert or when we have an update. So how I can bypass this? I can tell you that I checked the internet, I searched a bit, and I didn't find any post blog about this solution, so I will give you my personal tweak. And it's very simple. Let's go back to our environment. And this is the tweak that I'm going to use. I create another table. I call it a log table. Here, I will insert all the information about actions that are done in my database, which are relevant to what I want to use as a trigger to the Logic app. I already created it, so I do not execute. Next, I create simple triggers. Azure Database support triggers, so I can use trigger on event for create a table. And inside the trigger, what I'm doing a simple insert to the log table. And we know that insert of rows we can use for our Logic app. So this is all the trick. I'm using triggers in order to insert information. So this is trigger for a create table, trigger for drop table, and trigger for alter table. Let's clean the information that we have this time. And let's create our Logic app. Okay, our next Logic apps for today. What is this? Logic apps I will call DDL because it will trigger by DDL action. Great, exactly like before, I'm using blank Logic apps as a start, and I will use SQL Server. This is exactly like before. I'm using the same when an item created, but this time, let's complete. You see that I don't need to configure the connector to the SQL Server because I already created one connector. So let's use the connector. And this time I'm going to monitor the log table. Nothing changed here. Like before, save. Great. Next step, again, email. It's our send email, version 2. 2. Okay, now I want to send email to myself. This is a alert for my team, for example. So I will use my email. We don't need a dynamic value here. Subject, what I will use for the subject. This is the information that was in the table that we monitor. We have a row that called the description, which include the information about the task that was executed, create table, drop table, and etc. And we have the date time. So the subject can be, for example, the DDL action. The name will be taken from the table, was executed. And here I will use exactly the same. DDL action was executed. At, let's write the time, and that's it. Save. Oops. What we have here. This is the database name and not the email. 1 second. This is the email that I want to use. Okay. Done. Let's go test it. So I will create a new table. If I create a new table in the Azure database, a trigger will be executed. Which trigger? This trigger, the trigger on create table. And this trigger will insert information to the log table. The log table we monitor as a trigger to the Azure Logic app. Let's use it. Create table, T1, execute. You can count 10 seconds. Let's see just it. We have it in the log. Here it was added to the log table. Oops, wing, the email arrived. Let's do more task, alter table, for example, and I add another column. Let's drop the table. Okay, so I expect to get 3 emails. The first one already arrived. This is the first one. Voila. And here are the other 2. So the first one, the DDL action create table was executed. The next one, the DDL action, and etc. We have a fully monitor solution. What about monitoring performance, for example, or can we monitor a select query? A select query or a performance that we check some internal CPU use and the execution time, block, wait, and etc. Are not related to triggers. We cannot create a trigger on select. So how can we bypass this issue? So my next scenario is I want to do it. I want to use Logic App to monitor those queries. I will give you the solution in a simple explanation. We are not going to demonstrate it. Basically, it's the same idea. The only difference is that my trick is to use extended event. So we can use extended event in Azure Database. It is supported. And we can create, using the extended event, a trace file, which is stored in the Azure blob. And as I mentioned, Logic Apps is the perfect tool to integrate between different environment and entities. And Logic Apps have a connector to Azure blob. So we can use exactly the same idea and use a trigger, not on the SQL server, but on the file in the blob. And this trigger is executed every time that the file is updated. So this way we can use Logic App to basically monitor everything in the database. What is the time? Wait, we are exactly on time. I want to go over a real case scenario that I'm using. I will show you exactly how I send emails to our user group members. So in order to do it, I need to use a different account. And this is the one that I will use. And I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned that our user group called Data Platform Global Hebrew. So this is the Logic Apps that I'm going to show you. We are going to dive into the Logic App graphical view, and later on I will speak about download the code and where you can get it. So let's go to the designer. It's a bit more complex. Let's go step by step and explain what we are doing. Basically, what I'm doing now, my goal is to manage an email distribute list. So in the database, I created a table. This is a different server, a different database. In the database, I created a table which include all the information of our members. So the only information that I need is first name, last name, email, and status. Status means is this person want to get emails or not? So if someone tell me, hey, I don't want to get any more email, I change the status to not active. For the sake of the demo, I created exactly the same table using my email. So I'm the only one in the table at this time. Okay, so you can see me, and to make this more interesting, John, can you hear me? John?
Yes, I can hear you.
I want to make it more interesting because at this time I'm the only one in the distributed email list. So can I use your email?
Yes,
And
you can
add
use
to the distribute list.
you can use tccohelp@gmail.com.
1 second. It's a problem without the chat, but you wrote me this on. Can you use Facebook and write the email?
I think I shared with you on Facebook already. I can redo it again. No issue.
Let me find it. It will make the demo more interesting.
You found it?
No, just send me on Facebook
I just
again.
did. I just did right now.
No, I didn't got it. In the chat on Facebook?
Yeah, you can type T like Tom.
Yeah,
S.
okay, I got it
Yeah.
now. Wait, Control
Okay.
C, great. Okay, this will be a proof that it's really work and I'm not cheating you. Hopefully you will get the email. So I add you to the distribution list. Execute, great. And this is what we have. So this is our distribution list. And let's go back to our logic apps. Okay, so this time I'm not using a SQL Server trigger. How will I execute our logic app? What will be the trigger? I decided to use HTTP request. Obviously, I secure that only a specific IP can send it and etc. But after I organize everything to work secure, this is a simple controller that you can use. And in order to use it, we need first to save it. After you put all the information. So what is the information and why you need to save it? Because only after you will save it, you will get the URL. This URL created for us by the Azure. And using this URL, I will send a request to this URL. So what we need to use? I decided to use post. You can use post or get. Get means that all the information will be in the URL itself, but I want to post a lot of information. I will use post, and the information itself I will send, I will format as a JSON. So here I'm telling the logic app what will be the template of the JSON. So this is our template of what I'm going to send. And I added even more parameters, relative PaaS. Those parameters are coming in a get approach in the URL itself. I will show you when I will execute it, what I'm using. Okay, Let's keep this for a second. Next, of course, I'm going to the SQL server because I need to get all the data from the distribute list. I'm using a simple control of execute SQL. So I have a free flexible option to use any query that I want. And this is the query that I'm going to use right now. You see I'm using the test DL. This is exactly the same query that I have here without the filter of the status. The result that came from the server, I will need to parse and work on. So what I did here is an action that called add parallel branch. Why? Because I'm using a HTTP request. So I need to bring something to the client as fast as I can. What I will bring back, let's see. So those are executed in parallel. And I will give back to the client status code 200, which means everything is okay. And this will be the information I will bring back to the client. Text that say email are sending at this time, because the email can be sent for 100 different addresses or 1,000, so it can take time. I'm only saying it started to execute it. For more information, and we will see what we get. Next, I'm using for each. For each loop, take the information that we got here and break it to each row. And I'm telling you that the input is the result set table that I got in previous step. And I want to send email. I skipped this for a second. I want to send email exactly like before. Notice that in the body, I'm using something different. I'm not using a text. I'm using email body, which is a variable. So let's go back and understand why I'm using this. Notice this is really a bad design, in my opinion, but Microsoft did not let us send free XML format. I cannot use XML here, so I need to find a way to bypass this problem. By the way, there was an old send email controller that worked great with the option to send to format HTML code, but here we don't have. So what I'm using is this trick. I'm using a variable, and the variable will include our information. Going back to what I skipped before, variables always we need to configure at the beginning of the logic apps. This is a limitation of the way that this is designed. So always, even if you only need to use the variable inside the loop, I will need to initialize it at the beginning. So this is what I'm doing, very simple. I'm taking a controller that called initialize variable, name, and I'm saying what is the type, that's all. And now inside the loop, I can set the value of the variable. And here is the HTML that I want to send to the people that will get the email. Okay, so this is a very complex HTML. How did I create this HTML? You can use any online editor, what is called what you see is what you get. Search Google, there are a lot. Personally, in this group, what I'm doing, I'm using Microsoft MSDN forums, because in any way I need to put announcement about the event here in the forum. So this is the email that I'm going to send, very complex as you see. This email is in Hebrew. It is information about our next event, which already passed. It is information about event that was at February 18. And let's see what we have here. This is a simple what you see, what you get editor. I just create the email as I want, and I can go to the HTML and copy this information, the HTML code, inside our variable. This is the tweak. And now I can send the email. The title is here, and we want to have a dynamic information about to whom to send. So we have to is taken from the database. You see, this is the result set. Email. If I will click here, you can see what we have here. We have several dynamic information. We have variables that I can use. We have the execute SQL, which is the information from the table. And in this one, we are in the email. So I take the email information. Where is it? Here. And we have information that we got from the HTML, from the HTTP request. I can use this as well. After I finish to design my email, I added another step which tell me what was the result of the execution. How I do it? I created a parallel. Again, I split to parallel branch. In both branches, I'm using insert row. This is not read. Now we are working on the other side of the equation. We are using Logic app in order to manipulate the data in the database. So I'm using insert row, and I insert this row to the table. The information is here. And notice this information, configure run after. Configure run after give us the option to say, hey, execute this only if the execution before was okay, successful, or maybe it was fail. So this one I execute on success, and this one I execute on failure. Okay, this basically what we have here. I didn't change anything. So let's just go up and see it in action. So you remember that I told you that I will need to trigger it using HTTP request. We can use any form you can create in your website, or you can directly send HTTP request from PowerShell, which is what I'm going to use right now. Second. Okay. So let's start. This is a parameter named JSON, which have some information that I want to send to the Logic app. And let's configure the URL. This is the dynamic URL that the Logic app created for me. I told you after we save it first time. Notice that I'm using here this information. Those are parameters that are sent in get method, and this information I'm sending using post method. Okay, and I simply need to execute it. And if everything okay, so I should get an email telling me about our next event. Did you hear the ring? And John, can you check if you got your email? I already heard that I got my email. Let's go over. This is the response that I created here, just to get something back very fast. And you remember, this is the response. And I send email in this part. Let's check my email. John, did you got your email?
Yep, I have it.
So it's working. And this is my email. And this is not an email that I can create for Meetup. This is an email that I sent to my user group about our next event. You can see that it's well formatted. It tells us all the information and the link to our next event, which is already PaaS. Okay, so I have another scenario that I want to mention, and I will speak about it later on. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to mention that sending email, it's not the only thing that we can do. We can, using a trigger from SQL Server is not the only thing. We can always use other connector, for example, to Twitter. You can use Logic apps to send new messages to your Twitter account. You can do something that I call it archive your profile, which I'm doing, not in Twitter, in other community interfaces, but I should do it with Twitter as well. What you can do is to use a trigger of new tweet in your account, and every time that you have a new tweet, you will use Logic app, it will execute the Logic app, and then you can take the information from the Twitter account, the tweet information, to your database. And this way, I can archive all the information in my Twitter, all the messages that I send or get, but I'm using it for archive my messages. So let's go back here. I'm not going to execute it, but let's use this tree there. Just as temporary to show you that we have Twitter. We have a controller to Twitter, and you can use it to get when new tweet is posted, and we can have more than 300 connectors at this time, and I'm sure that in the future we will get more than 1,000. Microsoft always add more and more controller to integrate more and more system and interfaces around the world. This is a good time for questions if you have. So you can put your hand, mark your hand if you have a question, and we can open the microphone for a few minutes. Or I will go straight to summarize and give you some more tips. But it's good time for questions. So,
by the way, thank you so much, Ronen, and that is an amazing session, Ronen. Right? Allah, just for your information, I gave you access to unmute yourself. You can raise your hand, and I will tell you to unmute yourself. So this way, we're gonna do that in order, and Ronen can respond to your questions.
I'm using the 2 minutes that I need to present a sponsor, since we don't have any sponsor to give you to speak. Yeah, I see someone put his hand. You don't need to put your hand if you are the only one, just speak. Unmute yourself.
Well, hello, thanks for the great presentation. I'm wondering if there is a way to use a Kusto query as an input and use Logic apps as a way of getting the results of a Kusto query into an Azure SQL database. Thank you.
Basically, the question that you ask, in other words, is do we have a connector to Kusto query? I don't know, since I'm not using a Kusto query. We need to check it. As I said, there are more than 300 connectors. I cannot remember all of them. But if there is a connector, you can just try to find it. 1 second.
Yeah. Is there any connector
for? Maybe we'll find it here. How you called it?
Can you check for Azure Monitor instead? Because this is part of App Insight, if I'm not mistaken. Can you check for Azure Monitor or App Insight?
Azure Monitor?
Yeah, or App Insight.
Here we have several Azure Monitor logs.
Yeah, the crystal.
Okay, I don't want to go over each controller. The answer to your question is that I don't know specifically each one of the controller. There are more than 300. Just go search if there is a controller. The answer is yes. Once you find the controller, then you can integrate all the system together. This is the idea of Logic Apps. Okay. I think that this answers the question.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, no, because I don't know specifically, but it gives you the way to find the answer. And we can wrap up. If there are questions, you can continue to ask. And we need to close the meeting as well. And I want to give you some more tips for today. Okay, so let's summarize what we saw today and give some more advanced tips. Let's see. So Azure Logic Apps and Azure Database can interact in two-way, as we saw. This means that we can trigger execution of Logic Apps as a result of actions in the database. And vice versa, we can trigger manipulation on the data from Logic Apps. We saw that we have a built-in trigger for insert or update rows, but we don't have other options, for example, for other events. So I show you a small tricks that we can actually use Azure Database triggers in order to add information to a table, and then we can use it in order to trigger Logic Apps. And we can use extended events as well to trigger Logic Apps. Sending email is only one type of interaction that the Azure Logic Apps give us. We can use other controllers like write file to the blob. We can write message to Twitter. We can write file to OneDrive. We have a connector to Gmail I mentioned at the beginning. We can send HTTP requests to any application. Azure Logic Apps is basically the perfect enterprise integration platform for Azure Database. Together, integration with the world. Let's go over some issues that you might encounter when you create a distribution email list. For example, how we can send HTML code in the email. I show you my solution. This is a common solution. You simply use parameter. And using parameter or variable, we can send HTML code. But you still have an issue. Using dynamic information inside for each will not work for you by default. Why? Because for each loop runs in parallel, and by default, it used, we have time to show it. Let's go here. Here, this. Okay. If I will try to use dynamic information here in the variable, it will not work. Why? Because the information that we have here It's basically related to 20 rows that come from the previous step. This is by default. So what will happen is that everyone will get the same information, and it will not be dynamic. It will be the information of the last one between those 20 rows. So in order to change and to make it work, the solution is to say don't use asynchronic. If I will disable this, then the emails will be sent one by one. Okay, so solution one is to go to the setting as I show you and to change the asynchronic pattern. There is another solution that you can use, which is to use an array and a child logic app. So instead of sending the email directly inside the for each, we will execute a child logic app and send the email in that child. Another issue that you might encounter is using a configuration of run after. I showed you that we have this option that I used here to say when this is run. Configure run after, and this is a problem because this not check each one of the emails if it was sent okay. The email is sent asynchronic. It only gives us the information if the other side return a 200 status, which means, okay, I got the information. Now I will send the email on my time. So in this case, if everything works okay, not in the sending the email, but in general, in the flow, this will always go to the success. And this part will never be executed. This part will be executed only if there is a problem in the flow itself. So what is the solution? How can we check if a specific email was sent okay? The only way to do it is to remove the option of retry. If you go here to the setting of the email, you can see that we have an option, which I use it and it's very recommended to use, to retry to execute sending the email. So if it didn't succeed the first time, it will try again and again and again. How many times? I use 15. This is what I'm using in production. This is a real production distribution list logic app that I'm using. So this is what I'm using 15 times. I'm trying to send the email. In my experience, it always works. I tested it in several hundred users. All the emails came to the users as much as I know. The interval between sending them and if I want to actually check if the email itself was sent or not, so I must disable this option, because if this option exists, I don't know if the next time that it will try to send the email, it will succeed. So the way to do this is a simple tweak. You will need to disable retry since it leads to success. And what you will need to do is to use a do until loop and manage a retry by yourself. And I hope that you found this session interesting and practical. We are exactly on time. And you can contact me if you have any question or feedback using Facebook or LinkedIn. You can copy the link. I cannot give you, the chat is not working. And you are welcome to send me feedback and comments about this session. Please remember that your feedback is the only way that we have as speakers to improve ourselves for next event. So please do send me feedback, tell me it was good, not good, how can it be better. I highly appreciate getting feedback. And what's next? So I'm planning to speak in Hebrew user group at the same, exactly on the same topic in a few weeks. So unfortunately, I will not upload the code that I show you, the Logic app, until the next event about this topic. But the meeting is recorded and it will be available online hopefully very soon. John can give more information about this. And you can always follow me on Facebook for more update and announcement about other events that I speak at. And code will be available online, but it will take a few weeks. I want to thank John for inviting me to speak in your community. And above all, thank you all for participating in my session. I wish you all a great day and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If you have
Thank
more
you.
questions, I'm still here.
Yeah, thank you, Ronen, and thank you all for your participation. If you guys have a question, let me know. Unmute yourself and then, ask the question. Otherwise, you guys have a good one. By the way, thank you so much, Ronen, for your great presentations. Let's give them a couple seconds. If there's no more questions, we're gonna end the meeting. And then, by the way, related to that Azure Monitor Log Analytic questions, I just Google it. I will share a link with everyone and share your profile information as well, right? So this way they can follow up on that as well, right? Okay, I think this is the end. Just to be honest with you, Ronen, you can't imagine how much I learned from your session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will share the recorded video with you as well and to all other.
Great.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good one, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gene.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ronen.
Bye.